I'm gonna walk you through 3 main reasons, even though there's many more, why you need a realtor to represent you in buying a new build property. I recently represented my clients here in Arizona in purchasing a new build, and throughout this process, I was reminded yet again why it's crucial to have a realtor represent you in these transactions. This whole transaction felt like quite the horror story. There were a lot of red flags, shady business, and honestly, had my clients not had a realtor to represent them, so many things would have gone unnoticed over their head, and it was totally intentional to be that way. So as their realtor, I was able to help clear the muddy water, help explain things so nothing was going over their head, keep them in the loop the whole way. And then in addition to that, I was able to leverage some things to negotiate them the best deal possible, which is my job. So listen up while I walk you through this transaction, the horrors that I saw, and the 3 biggest takeaways I have. Reason number 1, it's totally free. For starters, having your own agent representation in buying a new build is totally free. It is covered by the builders. They pay your agents commissions. It's totally free and at no cost to you. If you do not use your own representation, they will assign a realtor for you that works for the builder, which leads me to my second point. Reason number 2, if you do not have your own agent to represent you, no one in this transaction will. You need an agent and a lender. The lender who sets up your entire mortgage and payments, all of that, doesn't work for you, they work for the builder. And the builder's agent, who represents you in negotiating the best deal possible, doesn't work for you, they work for the builder, and they have quotas to meet. Nobody represents you. Nobody has you in their best interest, and it shows throughout the transaction, trust me. In this transaction, we hit a major hurdle where a lot of red flags went up for me when we had the appraisal, which granted, I will note, happened about 2 weeks before closing, which in a normal transaction you have way early on so you can iron out all the kinks. Red flag number 1. Our appraisal actually came back $50,000 less than the price we agreed upon. For the sake of simple math, let's say we agreed upon a purchase price of $600,000, which means the appraisal came in at $550,000. Now, if you don't know what an appraisal is, no worries, let me explain it real briefly. The bank needs to confirm that the house is actually worth $600,000 before they loan out $480,000 to purchase the house. What if the house was only valued at $400,000 and they're actually loaning out more than what the home is worth? That's exactly what they want to avoid. So the bank sends out an appraiser, they assign a value to the home. In an ideal situation, it's exactly the amount that you agreed on, so that way your terms remain the same. But in the unfortunate circumstance that it comes in $50K lower than asking, then you need to figure out where that money's gonna come from, because the bank will only loan out so much. For example, if the appraisal came back at $550,000, the bank is only going to lend out, say, 80% of that. And we have to come up with the other 20%. But now we have a deficit because we agreed on a higher price, and the bank is not going to make up that deficit. So it can go one of 3 different ways. Either the seller comes down in price, the buyers make up the full difference of that deficit, including in addition to their down payment, or they meet in the middle, which is the ideal situation. They come down in price, $25,000, we come up with $25,000, everybody's happy. But when buying a new build, you sign a purchase contract right at the beginning that's about 80 pages long, insane. And in that agreement, it says that the buyers will make up the difference in any low appraisal. Basically, the builders can set any price that they want, and buyers just have to figure it out if the appraisal comes back low. Now that you know what an appraisal is, let's see how that affects this transaction. Now, due to the amazing incentives builders have, my clients decided to opt into using the builder's lender. I don't recommend it, but the incentives are almost worth it sometimes. It's always worth it to double check with another lender, your personal lender, or ask your realtor for a lender. Sometimes they have good incentives too, and they might be able to match it or come really close. And if that's the case, do not go with the builder's lender. So I call the lender and I say, hey, I understand you told my client that nothing's gonna change. And I know, and we both know, that's not really possible. Can you walk me through the numbers on this? And this guy, we'll call him Kyle. Kyle used the most intentionally vague terminology, like not the language we normally use between lenders and agents and anything in real estate. Instead of saying down payment, he kept saying they're out of pocket, which is not a formal term when we're talking numbers and how is our loan going to be structured. And he kept just saying, Jessica, it's the same. It's nothing's changing. Nothing's changing. And I know that is impossible. The numbers don't add up. So here's where the red flags were. He said the purchase price will stay at $600,000. The bank is going to loan out that amount, the remainder, and your client's out of pocket remains the same. He then threw out there that he's going to cover their PMI, or somehow he vaguely threw out that there's a $5,000 PMI, but don't worry, we're going to cover that. Like they were like a hero or something, which definitely threw up another red flag for me, because why is there PMI? Now I'm going to go on a side tangent. What is PMI? If you put down less than 20% on a home, you will likely have PMI. It is basically a second set of interest that's tacked on to your loan because you're a riskier buyer because you didn't put as much money down. That's it. But my clients deliberately wanted to put 20% down. They had cash, they had the 20% down because they didn't want to have that interest. It's just extra money thrown out the window and they didn't want to do that. So that was a red flag for me. Why is there PMI if everything stays the same? If everything stays the same, they should be putting 20% down. Why? What's not adding up here? And I specifically asked him, why is there PMI if my clients are putting 20% down? You said that's not going to change. And he said, Jess, you don't need to worry about it because we're going to cover the PMI. They won't have PMI and their out of pocket remains the same. I called up my buddy James, the lender I love to use with all my transactions. I'll link him below. And him and I walked through the numbers. We then realized when he says my client's out of pocket remains the same, he wasn't talking about their down payment, which is clearly why I didn't say down payment. What he was trying to do was my clients were very well prepared to pay upfront in cash $120,000. Well, he was going to take a portion of that as their down payment, let's say 60% of that, and put that towards the house. And then he was going to take the remaining 40% to make up the difference in cash and price so that they could close at a higher amount. Never once was this made clear. When he says everything remains the same, your out-of-pocket remains the same. At some point, he even slipped up and said your down payment remains the same. So my clients were under the impression that they were going to put $120,000 into this house, that would build as equity, not give them 40% of that just as cash, as like a payout, like a paying over asking sort of situation that they will never see again and will not build them any equity. So I went in circles and circles and circles during this process, by the way. I even called the agent who represents the builders, who would have represented my clients had I not represented my clients. And she didn't even know what was going on. She's like, I don't know, Jessica, that's kind of a lender thing. I don't really get it. And I was like, well, let me explain it to you because you know how this works. So I explained it to her. She's like, you're right, there is a deficit. I don't know who's making that up. And I said, well, I'm gonna tell you right now, your lender's trying to take part of our down payment, which is put towards equity in our house, and use that as the deficit. And she's like, oh yeah, that would make sense. And I was like, yeah, but he didn't say that up front. And even when I asked for documentation, it took him like 3 days to get that to me. Why don't you put this all on a sheet? Give me all the numbers so that way we're not having this miscommunication that we were clearly having where you're not being honest with me. After all this, I feel really terrible because my clients felt honestly lied to. The lender who's supposed to represent them was being very shady. He wasn't explaining that a portion of their money is not going to go towards the house. It's just to pay off the builder so they can get a higher price point. They also felt like they were paying over asking for the house, which as their agent is never a good thing, and I never want them to do. Unless it's a market where if you want the house, you need the house, you pay for the house. Now at this point, my clients really want to walk away from the deal, but the problem with that is they really can't, because in that 80-page purchase contract that we signed right at the beginning, there's a clause in there that states that the builder will keep our earnest money, no questions asked, no negotiating, point blank. Their earnest money was about $14,000. There's also a clause in there that says they could potentially keep double earnest money, $24,000. Totally not worth it to lose $24,000 over a $50,000 deficit here. I ran the comps again on the house, and honestly, the appraisal did come in lower than I would have priced it at. And in looking at other homes in the area, you know, $600,000 really wasn't that bad. If they even kept the house for a year and sold it, they would still make a profit. So the appraisal came back low. Yes, their money isn't going to go towards the house, but if they were in a bind and had to sell in a year, they wouldn't lose money on the house. So all was well. They really did want to back out, but they knew that wasn't smart. Number 3, Your agent is able to negotiate for you in a way that you might not be able to unless you are totally trained in negotiating and contracts. Now remember, if you don't have an agent, you'll be using the builder's agent. And so if you're trying to negotiate, it's almost like going against Goliath using Goliath's real estate agent. It's very hard and almost never happens. I didn't feel like we got a fair enough deal. I didn't like how the transaction went. I didn't like working with that lender. It was very shady. So I took this and I used it as leverage to hopefully make my clients feel a little bit better about the situation. I approached the agent, I told them the situation, I spelled it all out for her to where she could understand what was going on. I explained the language that the lender was using and how that was inappropriate and untrustworthy. At that point, I asked them to drop the price, which we know from that 80-page document they will not do. But it's worth a shot, and I'm gonna fight for my clients and advocate for them as much as I can. That request went up the chain to management, down the chain to management, in a ringer, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. They finally agreed to come down 10 grand in the purchase price, which felt like a huge win to me because this all happened 1 week before we closed, which is absolutely insane. This is why appraisals should be way earlier in the transaction so you can jump over those hurdles sooner, iron them out, and have a smooth close. This was a very hectic last week of trying to close this deal, but I'm very proud that we were able to get them a deal. They did cover the PMI. They got a good deal on the house to begin with. And they came down 10 grand in price. In closing, have a real estate agent represent you when you are buying a new build house. If anything, just to know what you're walking into, what you're agreeing to, and clear the air so nothing goes over your head. If anything, for that reason. Second reason, it's free, so why not? It's the smartest thing you can do. And third, they can negotiate for you, have your back, and fully represent you, not the builder. Thanks for tuning in to the Do Over Next. I'm Jessica Dobrnick. I'm an Arizona realtor with a background in interior design. We are here for all things real estate.